And we are in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're talking with Keshab Sen, or actually talking with Ramakrishna, who's talking about Keshab, who's there, and he's just talking and giving them instructions. And last week we were talking about singing the names and glories of God. Ramakrishna was telling us that in this age, in this day and time, that the fastest and most effective way of self-realization is through the path of bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. And now that's not the only way. It's not anything like that. He just said that in this day and age, it's the most effective because of the way society is. You can't go off and meditate in solitude for hours a day. And even if you do, you can't stay in solitude in order to protect that clarity of mind, that purity of mind. And he says society just no longer is that way. And the amount of effort it takes to feed ourselves nowadays and the values of society have all changed. And so it's very difficult to do that practice, to do the practice of like a Jnana yoga or Raja yoga. And so he encourages us to practice bhakti yoga, but that doesn't mean we can't gain any help and knowledge from the other three paths. So that's why we study all of the paths, because they can be helpful. Ramakrishna tells us to take your Jnana yoga, your path of knowledge, that what you learn, that the ultimate reality is one without a second. He says, take your knowledge and tie it in the corner of your dhoti, or in Western speak, put it in your pocket and keep it with you and let it temper your practice of devotion. Because Vivekananda says that one of the dangers of the path of devotion is fanaticism. Everybody thinks that their lover is the best, right? And so because of egoism, we tend to diminish all the other lovers. And so we see that a lot in the paths of bhakti yoga. The traditions that are traditions within bhakti yoga, like Christianity, Islam. These are all practicing bhakti yoga, and we can see that it does sort of naturally tend toward that exclusion. That my lover is the best. My prophet, my teacher, my incarnation is sometimes not only the best, but the only. And so Vivekananda warns against that and says that, Jnana yoga is a good antidote to that. This knowledge that God alone is real and all else is illusory is helpful for kind of leveling the player field. So we all know that Muslims can realize God, Christians can realize God, Buddhists can realize God, atheists can have self-realization. That it's not exclusionary in any way. It's just a matter of seeking and wanting to know what is the nature of our being. And last week I was watching the end of the video because I had to remind myself where we left off. And God, I was sick last week. I sounded terrible, but I was watching that, and I wanted to temper a little bit what I said, because at the end I got kind of excited about creating, he said, chant the names and glories of God. And I sort of went off on a tangent about having fun with that and enjoying your practice with God and writing your own chants and writing your own songs and making it your very own. And I certainly stand behind that, but I don't want to give the idea that that's the nature of spiritual life, that we don't have to practice a truth, or that we don't have to abide by a scripture. It's not like that at all. Ramakrishna, as a matter of fact, when he says, well, not just Ramakrishna, actually, at one point I did a study of different scriptures trying to find what each tradition said was the one most important thing. And they all come up with basically three of them, that love, of course, is the one most important thing. Love of God and love of each other. And that the second one, and these are not in sequential, it's an and not a list. And the second one is truth. You have to know the truth. And the truth, of course, is an inner alignment, an inner integrity between what you think, what you say, and what you do. But it also has to be a truth in truth. Like, what is the reality? There is a reality to be known. And so your practice and your philosophical structure, your internal metaphysics certainly are your choice to the ones that work best for you, but it should be according to a tradition that has successfully brought somebody to realization, so that you know that it's stable, that it's possible. And the way that we do that is by making sure that if we're having an inner experience, or if we're practicing a metaphysics or a philosophy, what we do in our practice should tally with what our guru says, what our scripture says, and what our experience says. And those things should not contradict each other. They should stay into a unity. And so we do have to be devoted to a truth. And of course, the third thing that I found that the religions find is very important is your sincerity and your earnestness, right? And it's important that in that all of that leads us to renounce the things that are not helpful to us, that are not serving truth, that are not serving love, and that are not serving our sincerity and our earnestness, that we renounce those things, and that we're always discerning inside to make sure that we're not living according to ego, but that we're living according to our knowledge of our true nature, a pure love and a pure wisdom. And that's very, very important, right? And this Sunday, I kind of was talking with our group here in Colorado about our dedication to our practice. You know, that if you're on a spiritual path and you want to pursue spiritual truth or truth in general, you have to have a daily practice. Have to. Because this world is constantly teaching you many, many, many things that are not helpful to spiritual life. And if you don't have a focused and concentrated practice every day that helps to counter those ideas, you know, then and helps you to remember to discern and to remember to free yourself of your egoism, we get trapped, we get caught, and it's a very, very subtle trap. It happens very slowly. You know, one compromise at a time. It happens, and it always starts with the small stuff, right? And so that's why we have to be vigilant, because the body and mind that we often attach to are taking us after their own hungers and desires, their own moods and cravings. And we always have to remember our true nature in there, which is easy if we're discerning. But if you're not doing that discerning and you're not reminding yourself daily, you're going to probably get sidetracked. You're going to get fooled at some point. So be dedicated to those things. Be dedicated to your practice, and go forward and chant the names of God and have fun. So he says, I said to Keshav, chant the name of Hari, which is another name for God. In the Kali Yuga, one should sing the name and the glories of God. After that, they began to sing the name of God with drums and cymbals. Do you know how my faith in the name of Hari was all the more strengthened? Holy men, as you know, frequently visit the temple garden. And once a sadhu, that's one of these wandering monks, once a sadhu from Multan arrived. He was waiting for a party going to Gangasagar. Pointing to M, the sadhu was of his age. It was he who said to me, the way to realize God in this Kali Yuga, in this age, is the path of bhakti, or devotion, as prescribed by Narada. And there is a set of scriptures called the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and they're beautiful. And I highly recommend that you take a look at those on your own sometime to read through those. We will probably pick them up and study them here before long. So one day Keshav came here, and Keshav was a good friend of Sri Ramakrishna's, and he was leading a new movement at that time called the Brahmo Samaj, which was sort of just a reformation within Hinduism. And he was a great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna often went and visited at their services and their gatherings. So one day Keshav came here with his followers. They stayed until 10 at night. We were all seated in the Panchavati. Pratap and several others said they would like to spend the night here. Keshav said, no, I must go. I have some work to do. I laughed and said, can't you sleep without the smell of your fish basket? And he tells the story to clarify what he means. He said, once a fishwife was the guest in the house of a gardener who raised flowers. She came there with her empty basket after selling her fish in the market and was asked to sleep in a room where the flowers were kept. But because of the fragrance of the flowers, she couldn't get to sleep for a long time. Her hostess saw her condition and said, "Hello, why are you tossing from side to side so restlessly?" The fishwife said, "I don't know, my friend. Perhaps the smell of the flowers has been disturbing my sleep. Can you give me my fish basket? Perhaps that will put me to sleep." Well, her basket was brought to her, and she sprinkled some water on it and set it in front of her nose. Then she fell asleep soundly and snored all night. I like this story because the smell of flowers is considered to be the better thing, but she needed the smell of fish to fall asleep. What do you think he's telling us or sharing here? What do you think he's teasing Keshup about? It's your habits. We've got good and bad habits, and if we violate them, we're disturbed, right? And so it's this idea of being attached to things, needing things that you know, in this case, a fish basket. Who cares? But he's comparing it to the smell of flowers. So he's saying, there are things that we're attached to that stink like fish, but you're going to prefer them over the flowers if you're accustomed to them, if you expose yourself to them all the time. So if you've got habits that aren't helpful to your spiritual life, if you've got habits of, watching, uh, stringing through YouTube videos, and this is a form of confession, that if you watch these YouTube videos or stream through things, put things into your mind that aren't helpful to your peace of mind, that aren't helpful to your selflessness and your moving away from egoism, be careful about those, because you come to prefer those things, and your mind starts to travel down those paths and get established in those paths, and they're keeping you from having that joy of life, that fulfillment of being, and lead you into wherever they're leading you. So watch closely what habits you develop. Hafiz writes a wonderful poem about. He says, you get to have any kind of habit that you want. So start to forge habits that spin gold. Do make habits of things. What you do first thing in the morning is very important, right? So come up with a habit that helps you spin gold out of yourself in the morning. Something that's helpful for your peace of mind and helpful for your remembrance of your divine nature, right? And so spend some time in the mornings and do it every morning, and do it long enough for it to make a difference through your day. And when you've started to forget about it around 11:30 or 12, come up with another little habit to give it a little boost for the afternoon, and then again in the evening, if you can manage, to bring your mind back to these things, so that you can be the person that's touching the ideal that you hold within. What is the ideal person? What is your ideal self? What is it that you feel inside that you really are? And do things to help you reach that. At this story, the followers of Keshup all burst out into loud laughter. Keshup conducted the prayer that evening at the bathing ghat on the river. After the worship, I said to him, "It is God who manifests himself in one aspect as the scriptures. Therefore, one should worship the sacred books, such as the Vedas, the Puranas, and the Tantras. In another aspect, he has become the devotee. The heart of the devotee is God's drawing room. One can easily find one's master in the drawing room. Therefore, by worshiping his devotee, one worships God himself." Right? And so that is teaching us that, first of all, if you're looking for God, you don't have to run to a mountaintop in India or a monastery in Tibet. God's drawing room, where he chooses to hang out, or she chooses to hang out, is the heart within you. And a devotee is somebody who is aware of the presence of the divine within their heart and joins them, sits themselves within their heart, right? Knows themselves as being that manifestation or that image of God. And so he's giving us a clue of where to find God, where to find the beloved. And it's within your very own self, right? And so God has become the scriptures, God has become the devotee, and God has made his drawing room in the heart of the devotee. And he says one can easily find one's master in the drawing room, right? Therefore, by worshiping his devotee, one worships God himself. So we look at one another, people who are aware of that divine presence within themselves, and we worship God through that person, in that person. We recognize that, and we see that, and we honor that, and we treat that person accordingly as a form of worship. And this can be your ability to see this divinity in everyone is not really a measure of their development, right? There is some of that. It's easier to see God in someone who's very loving and very selfless, obviously, much more easy than somebody who's some, arrogant, self-actuated person who's going around living according to ego. You might have to look a little harder, but finding it in others only happens when you have found it in yourself, because you will make assumptions that everybody around you is somewhat like you, and what you know of yourself, you will know of them. So if you touch that divinity within yourself, you'll naturally see it in others, because that's what we want to see first in others. We want to see that divinity before we notice anything else about that person's characteristics. Keshup and his followers listened to my words with great attention. It was a full moon night, and the sky was flooded with light. We were seated in the open court at the top of the stairs leading to the river. I said, now let us all chant Bhagavata Bhakta Bhagavan. All chanted in unison, Bhagavata Bhakta Bhagavan. Next I said to them, say Brahman is verily Shakti. Shakti is verily Brahman. Again they chanted in unison, Brahman is verily Shakti, and Shakti is verily Brahman. I said to them, he whom you address as Brahma is none other than she whom I call Mother. Mother is a very sweet name. Then I said to them, say Guru, Krishna, Vaishnava. At this, Keshup said, we must not go so far, sir. If we do that, all will take us for orthodox Vaishnavas. So let's talk about some of these things in here. Let us chant Bhagavata Bhakti Bhagavan, Bhakta Bhagavan. He's saying that basically the scripture, the devotee, the incarnation, that these are all the same. God can be found in all of these things, right? And then he says, Brahma is verily Shakti, and Brahman is verily Shakti, and Shakti is verily Brahman, right? He's saying that God and this manifestation are the same, right? That Brahman is God beyond attribute, God beyond action, God well, we can't really describe it. Any attributes we assign are illegal because he's infinite in every way. And we can't limit him with a name. We can't limit him with any attributes of personality or will or plan or anything like that, because he is the isness of the moment. And in the isness of the moment, as you see, if you study the moment, if you look at the moment, there's no change in the moment. It's a steady constant through which all change seems to pass. And so the ancient sages looked at God as two aspects. You've got this absolute unchanging about which nothing can be said, but then God manifests as this world and as this story and as each one of us. And within that personal God, the God of the creating God, which he names later on as Brahma, that we talk about the power of God, the manifestation of God as the Divine Mother. That's the feminine aspect of the divine. And for whatever just convention's sake, that which is the absolute unchanging is the male aspect, as it were, in this whole scene. But of course, I say as it were because of course God is beyond gender, right? You are not a gender, no matter what gender you may be attached to in yourself. You're not that. You're all of them, right? In your true nature. But as long as we believe that we are the body and we believe we are the mind, then whatever we think about gender, which will be informed in some degree to the body that we're carrying, whether we think that's our body or not our body, no matter how we approach it, our real goal is to transcend above all of them, not to figure out which one we're attached to, but to understand that our freedom lies in knowing we're beyond all of that and finding our identity in that isness of love, that isness of wisdom, and not on these temporary things that are going to drop off in another 50 years or so, for the younger ones. For those older ones, it's a little bit more imminent than that. And so to see that that is all one, and then just all, this idea of the unity of spiritual practice, the unity of religion, that religion really is almost a redundant word, because God is this moment and can be reached through an awareness, a pure awareness of this moment, where you find yourself not separate and apart from this moment and its expression, that God is there. And so this is that thing at the end, we don't know, we don't want to chant that because somebody's going to think we're orthodox of this or that, right? And really it went against their own identity like that. And I always like to say that don't let religion become your identity, right? Your religion is born of your identity with love, wisdom, and being, right? And that religion is merely a set of scaffolding, as it were, a set of scaffolding for your realization. And that, as Vivekananda says, it's lovely to be born in a church, but it's a terrible thing to die in one, right? He's saying that it's okay in the beginning to have your identity with your religion and to follow the precepts of that religion and to be true to it. And he encourages that, whatever religion it is that you were born into or that you chose on your own to follow and reach your realization. Any of them are fine, he says, but transcend it. If you do the work, you're going to come to a place where you're bigger than that, where you see that all of this is divine, as long as you see it as divine and understand it as divine, which happens not by understanding things, but by understanding yourself, finding that truth within you, finding that pure love, seeing the effect of ego, seeing how you get trapped into egoism, which is identity with body and mind, and going inside and seeing and experiencing. None of this is a matter of belief. It starts out as a belief. It starts out as an imagination, as everything does, but it shouldn't remain there. You should come to know your nature because you've gone inside and you've discerned and you've practiced a life that isn't motivated by body and mind. Right? I used to tell Keshav now and then, he whom you address as Brahma is none other than she whom I call Shakti, the primal energy. And this is a great exercise. It's understanding that a lot of our differences in religion come because of vocabulary, right? I call God Allah, and you call God Brahman, and I call God God, and we all assume that we're talking about different things. But the heart of the lover knows, sees the unity in it all, that love has manifested as all of these. And that God appears differently to all of us in the same way that everybody has different flavors and different things that they like and things they don't like, raised in different countries with different ways of doing things. I remember when I was in seminary as a Christian back in 1983, and I was taking my ironically my major was biblical missiology, how to be a missionary. I'm sorry, I just can't even imagine those days. But anyway, there it was. And one of the classes was one of the questions on the final actually was, okay, you've been sent on a mission to a place in North Africa, and in this place that you've been sent, no grapes do not grow there, and they eat bread that's not made from wheat. They eat a bread that's made of a different plant, and you want to take communion, and you want to give them the opportunity to take communion, where traditionally you need a glass of wine and you need some unleavened bread. And he says, what do you do? you know. And so you had to write an essay about what do you do? Are you going to import bread and wine for these people? Or are you going to grab something that are the local equivalent to what bread and wine would be somewhere else? And so this was a big question on the final. And actually, even in the I was part of the Church of Christ at that point, a very, very fundamentalist group, very, very, very absolutist on their approach to things. But even in that environment, the teacher taught us that the right answer is to take a local substitute. That you shouldn't have to bring a foreign thing in for a personal practice, like that these things are symbols, and anything that symbolizes that same thing is fine. So here Ramakrishna is sort of saying that sort of thing to us, right? He's saying that which I worship as mother and that which you worship as the unchanging absolute, they're the same things. Or Brahma, you worship a creator God that may be male or whatever. Just know, that what I'm worshiping is the same as what you are worshiping. We've just got different symbols for that thing. And to know that and to get past the surface level. That's what Vivekananda was meaning by he said, you can be born in a church, but don't die in one. Come to the point where your heart expands, where love is the one most important thing for you. So I used to tell Keshav now and then that he whom you address as Brahma is none other than she whom I call Shakti, the primal power. It is called Brahman in the Vedas when it transcends speech and thought and is without attributes and action. I call it Shakti, Adya Shakti, and so forth, when I find it creating, preserving, and destroying the universe, right? So this is how the traditional Hindu structure is broken up, that God, the absolute, God as he, she, that it is beyond all of these things. It transcends speech, right? Because it's not, speech needs subject, object, verb in order to happen. God cannot be talked about in terms of subject, object, verb. He can't do that. And so he's transcendent to speech and he's transcendent to thought. Why? Because thought requires time, space, and causation. And God is beyond time, space, and causation. So we cannot think of God. We cannot have an accurate thought of God. So he's transcendent to thought. He's without attributes, right? Why? Because there can be no limit. He's infinite. And if you limit him with an adjunct, if you say that he's male, then you're saying that he's not infinite, because he would have to be all things. There can't be a limit to it. And so God is without attribute and without action. Why without action? Because action only happens when there's discontentedness or imbalance, right? Once something is balanced, it doesn't move. Once it finds its most stable condition, it stops moving, right? The first time I was introduced to that, what grade was I in? Third grade. And it was in my playroom. And I used to have this big 40-gallon drum full of building blocks, wooden building blocks. And boy, I loved that. And I had built this big tower. And my dad came in around that point, and something, I guess, the opening of the door, something disturbed my tower, and it fell. And I was curious because I noticed that it stopped falling at one point, that it fell and then the blocks all stopped. And I asked my dad, I said, why doesn't it just keep falling? And Dad said, he explained to me, that things fall until they find their most stable state, and then they stop. They don't move anymore. And so God is beyond action because God is perfect. He is the most stable state. She is the most stable state. That is, I'm going to wear myself out going through all of these. But yes, that God is his most stable state, right? And so he is beyond action. I call it Shakti, which is the feminine, the mother, Adya Shakti, and so forth. When I find it, and what are the only really the possible actions in the universe? Creating, preserving, and destroying. And you can see everything is in a constant cycle of being created, or being sustained, or being destroyed. A very interesting thing to notice. Even our bodies, up until about 29 or something, they're being created. And then up until about 50, maybe, it's being sustained. And then after that, it's slowly meeting its destruction, right? Things start melting and reaching for the floor. I said to Keshab, it is extremely difficult to realize God while leading a worldly life, right? Why? Because a worldly life is built around the needs of the body and the ideas of the mind. And you're spending your whole day engaged as a body and attaching to a mind and its thoughts. And so leading a worldly life, which means leading a life of having to get up and go to work and buy a house and support a family and do all of the things that are necessary for that, keep the mind on the body and keep the mind on the keep the sense of self in the mind, right? And so it's very difficult to realize God, which is why we really emphasize practice. You have to try and counter that, to keep yourself constantly aware that this world is not as it seems to be, because this world as it seems to be is based on the senses. And then what the senses, the world that we create from the information from the senses, is what we fill our mind with. And so we get a double dose of delusion, right? To put that in the words of a Jnana, or the path of knowledge, we could say that God is one without a second. But when we experience it through a body, we immediately break that one without a second into 5 pieces, right? A taste, a touch, a sound, a sight, a smell. And from those 5 different pieces, then the mind has to reconstruct a unity, which it hasn't experienced. And it's trying to do it through the 5 senses. It can't do it, right? It can't do it. And so this is why we have to transcend those things. So it's extremely difficult, but he doesn't say impossible. He just says it's extremely difficult to realize God while leading a worldly life. How can a typhoid patient be cured if he is kept in a room where tamarind, pickle, and jars of water are kept? Therefore, one should go into solitude now and then to practice spiritual discipline. When the trunk of the tree becomes thick and strong, an elephant can be tied to it, but a young sapling is eaten by cattle. That is why Keshab would say in his lectures, live in the world after being strengthened in spiritual life. Right? So get your orientation down first, your spiritual orientation, and then go out and live the worldly life. That's why the Hindus break life into those different segments of life. And that first part of life is being a student, and that is establishing your knowledge, yourself in the knowledge of what you are. I'm spirit by nature. I'm love by nature. I'm wisdom by nature. And if I live according to that, then a fulfilling life will be the byproduct of that. And he's saying here this whole thing about typhoid. Now, I haven't had typhus, but apparently when you have typhus, you crave these things. You crave salt and sour things, and you crave water. And he's saying, how's a typhoid patient, within their knowledge of medicine at the day, those things were counterindicative of getting cured. But you would sit there craving them. And he said, so if you're in a room that's full of those things, how are you going to get yourself out of that, right? So if you've set up a life that serves your body and serves the preferences and moods of your mind, and you've worked hard at getting, all of those comforts and preferences taken care of, how are you ever going to know your true nature when you're spending all of your time serving your senses and your thoughts? So you have to take some time every now and then. That's why it's great. Before we started the recorder, someone was talking about going on a retreat up out into the Mojave Desert at a place called Pinyon Hills, one of our retreat centers. And the teaching that, Ramakrishna says, do that. Do it regularly, whenever you get time, whenever you can make time for yourself. Get off out of the world, step out of your day-to-day, right? Go to a place where you don't have your cell phone, you don't have the internet, you don't have your friends, you don't have your family. Go somewhere in solitude and go inward. Find out, what is the nature of this moment? What is the nature of existence? What does it mean to exist? Who are you? What is driving your thoughts? What is driving your body? Right? And he says to do this regularly to strengthen yourself so that you can counter the flow of the world, which is body-mind oriented. And he says it's not always going to be that way, right? When you're young, when the tree is young, it can be eaten by the cows. It can be pulled out of the ground quite easily. But when it grows up, you can tie an elephant to it, and it's strong, right? So that's important when you're young spiritually. It's not okay for you to go do things that are worldly, whatever they might be. I'll leave them to you. I don't want to get a moral list going here, but you all know what they are. If you go out and hang with people who are doing things that are counter to your spirit, to your nature, and you're young, you're going to be carried away by it all. And you're going to justify it because of peer pressure. And you'll disguise it in all different kinds of ways. Oh, I don't want to judge them. I don't want them to think that I don't approve of them. Well, all of those things are just justifications for you going out and doing it. But that's not the ideal. Not hanging out with certain people and not doing things with certain people. It's not the ideal. But as we're young and impressionable and not established yet in our knowledge of self, it's necessary. Then later on, you transcend it. Vivekananda said, he said, when I was young, if I was walking on a street and there was a theater, I'd cross the street to get away from that theater, to get around that theater, because back then that's, I guess, was considered immoral. He said, I would cross the street, but he says, now that I've grown, I'm a man, a spiritual man. He said, I could roommate with prostitutes and not be affected, not be tempted by that. That's the ideal. That's the ideal. And it's always interesting to me that anytime God is incarnated, there's always a prostitute in the story. And I think he's making that point. The ideal is to see God in everyone. And Ramakrishna has many experiences where he sees the Divine Mother in prostitutes who were sent to test him, actually, by people who wanted to find out whether he was really a holy man or not. And so that's the ideal he's saying here. So the real message in all of that noise is take some time regularly to get away by yourself, away from the noise of the world, and do your work. Find out who you are. Find out what's inside. Find out what's behind it all. He turns to the devotees. You see, Keshav was a great scholar. He lectured in English. Many people honored him. Queen Victoria herself talked to him. But when Keshav came here, he would be bare-bodied and bring some fruit, as one should when visiting a holy man. He was totally free of egotism. That means he was a very mature spiritual seeker, to be totally free of egotism, which means he'd been honored by the queen, and yet he came and he could be a shirtless servant on the street. He could operate in all worlds. He didn't demand his respect. He just didn't think that way. Tuattar, you are a scholar and a deputy magistrate, but with all that, you're henpecked. Go forward. Beyond the forest of sandalwood, there are many more valuable things: silver mines, gold mines, diamonds, and other gems. The woodcutter was chopping wood in the forest, and the brahmachari said to him, go forward. Right? So this is our teaching, because in spiritual life, a lot of times we're tempted to think we arrived, right? And as Westerners, self-criticism, it doesn't take much for us to think we're arrived, right? I went to a little seminar one time of Advaita Vedanta down in North Carolina at one time, and they had a guy lecturing on Advaita theory, the God, the one without a second. And he was talking, and it was a great lecture, very well done. And so afterward, I went and talked to the organizer of the lecture, and I asked her, how do you choose your lecturers? Where do they come from? And she says, oh, we only have enlightened people come to lecture. I was like, wow, that's something. To even find one of those in this world is quite a thing. But to be able to keep an agenda where you have them come speaking, wow, that's really something. And I hear a lot of talk about that these days, especially online. There's a lot of people that bill themselves as enlightened. When did you have your enlightenment? I was just looking at an article about that today, a website about that today, where the idea behind the website is to share your story of when you became enlightened. And so it's a collection of all of these stories of people saying that they're enlightened. I'm not going to judge it one way or the other, which you can tell by my attitude. It's there. But it's because, we're a very instant satisfaction culture. We want our burger now, and we don't want to wait for things. And these traditions grow out of a lifestyle of a lifetime of discipline and practice of renunciation. And they are not light, and they should not be considered quick wins, right? An enlightened person would almost never, ever present himself as an enlightened person. An enlightened person would present themselves as nothing, right? Because they're not aware of the self. They're not aware of the separation from the whole. They see themselves in everyone. The way that you see an enlightened person is it's very hard to provoke them. They are the same every time you see them. They're not beholden to moods, ups and downs. They're undistressed by circumstances. They're always able to accept whatever comes their way. And those people are very, very, very rare, very rare indeed. Right. All right. So he's talking to Adar. He tells him that story about the sadhu, the young brahmachari told him, go forward. And that's saying that in spiritual life, you'll have experiences. You'll start to understand things. And as you grow spiritually, people begin to respect you and people begin to reference you. And if you're not anchored, you'll go into egoism. Those things will feed you a sense of self that's separate from the rest, right? The more mature you are spiritually, you see more and more oneness. There's less and less about you that sets boundaries between you and everyone around you. And so he's saying, as you have these experiences in spiritual life, as you grow in spiritual life, don't even look at these gifts that come to you. Don't even pay attention to the honor that's coming to you. Go forward. Keep your eyes on God, always on the divine, always on love. Don't be looking at attributes that you have. Don't be look at things that you have. Don't measure yourself by things that are temporary, things that will die with the body and die with the mind. And stay constantly aware of that within yourself that is unchanging. It was there before the honor, and it's there after the honor. So the honor is the thing that comes and goes. Some people will honor you. Some people will never honor you. And you have to learn to not even notice by knowing that those things don't matter. They have nothing to do with your nature. So keep going forward in spiritual life. Don't ever stop with a collection of attributes and think that you've arrived somewhere or that you are something. I when I took sannyas or took my vows, when I got to wear orange all the time, one of the classes that we had was about the dangers of being a swami, of being a sannyasin, because people will treat you with respect. They're going to take, if you're in India, they'll literally lay on the floor in front of you and take the dust of your feet. And you get to be treated like that a lot by people. And if you are not centered, if you are not clear on what you are, that becomes ego food very quickly. And so we were taught to understand that when people salute you as a swami, it has nothing to do with you. They're saluting your orange color. They're saluting the ideal that you represent, not the personality or the person that you are. And so you should never take that personally. You should never think that they are laying on the ground because of you. They're laying on the ground because of the ideal that you represent. So this is that understanding. The other thing that was very much in line with what he's talking about here too is that we were taught that, people will come to you for spiritual instruction. People are going to come to you for advice, for their practices. They're going to come to you for their bliss. And he said, don't imagine that it's your responsibility to create bliss and give it to the world. That's not your responsibility. He says, God is that bliss. Your responsibility is to be a conduit, and you have to patch all the holes in that conduit. You have to get rid of your lust. You have to get rid of your greed. You have to get rid of your arrogance. You have to get rid of all of those attributes and all of those stories, so that when you turn to God and he fills your hand with some bliss, you can turn around and give that in its entirety to the world, right? But always remember, you are not the source of anything that the world needs. You are only a conduit for giving it, when God gives it to you. And so to keep that in mind, even as we grow, whether you're a sannyasin or not, know that each of us has no ability to help the world, no ability to improve the world. That is God and God alone that does that. If he gives you something that is helpful to somebody, it's your responsibility to stay pure enough that you don't see it as an act of you giving something to somebody. You see it as God working through you to give them what he wanted to give, or what she wanted to give to them. And you are incidental. God can raise 1,000 of yous out of pigeon poop. There is no need for you in this world, right? Because eventually you're just going to be on the pile of potting soil anyway, fertilizer. Sri Ramakrishna came down from the steps of the Shiva temple. Where am I? Came down the steps of the Shiva temple and went to his own room through the courtyard. The devotees were with him. Just then Ram Chatterjee came and said that the Holy Mother's attendant had an attack of cholera. Ram to the master, I told you about it at 10 this morning, but you didn't pay any attention to me. The master, well, what can I do? Yes, he's got cholera. What can I do about that? Yes, what could you do? But there were Rakal, Ramlal, and others, and even they didn't pay any attention. Kishori has gone to Alam Bazaar to get medicine. Master, alone? Will he get medicine? Where will he get the medicine? Yes, alone. He's going to get it at Alam Bazaar. Master to M, will tell the nurse what to do if the illness takes a turn for the worse, or if the patient feels better. Yes, sir. The ladies mentioned before saluted the master and were about to take their leave. Sri Ramakrishna again said to them, perform the Shiva Puja according to my instruction, and have something to eat before you come here. Otherwise, I shall feel unhappy. Come another day. Right, so this was the group of women that were practicing the Ekadasi and had been fasting. And Ramakrishna just couldn't bear the idea of a woman fasting. He was like, oh my goodness, no, please eat something. And so he had them eat, and he served them himself. And so he's telling them, really just showing them compassion, showing them a great love, and how he saw their suffering as his own. Sri Ramakrishna sat down on the porch west of his room. Narendra Banerjee, Hari, M, and others sat by his side. The master knew about Narendra's family difficulties. Master, you see, all these sufferings are because of a piece of loincloth. A man takes a wife and begets children, therefore he must secure a job. The sadhu is worried about his loincloth, and the householder about his wife. Further, the householder may not live on good terms with his relatives, so he must live separately with his wife. With a laugh, Chaitanya once said to Nityananda, listen to me, brother, a man entangled in worldliness can never be free. Right? Freedom, and what he's really meaning there is like a man entangled in worldliness. What does that mean? Well, it means somebody who's attached to their body and mind and serves the needs and longings and cravings of body and mind. They're subject to their moods. If they're in a good mood, they're a great person to be around. If they're in a bad mood, God help you. And he says there's no freedom in that. And what's he teaching us? He's saying that freedom doesn't mean you get to do what you want. That's bondage. Because it disguises, our slavery gets disguised because we think we're the body and we think that we're the mind. And so when the body is hungry, we go feed it. And when we pay attention to the mind, we have to feed it a certain thing because we don't like pickles, we like porridge or whatever, And so we're constantly serving the body, constantly serving the mind, and there is no freedom to be found in that. Real freedom is to know the self, and to know the self is to know that you need and desire nothing. You are free from desire. So every moment is full of potential without you running after anything. You've come to know there is nothing outside of yourself that is necessary for you. Right? It's a very high state to attain, and not one that we can understand from where we're at. Right? Because we can't just let our body die. We'll be like, oh my God, how can you just do that? That's so irresponsible. And how is that worship? And what does that have to do with God? You see, there's no understanding. So how can we possibly understand? But know that freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. True freedom is to have no desire whatsoever, so that this moment is always perfect for you. You are always in a state of contentment and aware of your native bliss, your native joy. Listen to me, brother. A man entangled in worldliness can never be free. M to himself. Perhaps the master is referring to the world of avidya. It is the world of avidya that entangles a householder, right? This world's composed of two things, avidya and vidya, light and darkness. And how do you know the difference? The things of darkness take you into multiplicity, right? You always need a sense of other in order to indulge in them. But things of light lead toward oneness, lead you toward a unity, right? Seeing yourself in others, realizing that all is a part of you until you come to know that you are everything in that sense. So those things that lead to multiplicity, those are darkness. Things that lead to unity is light. Or as Vivekananda said, that's the whole law of ethics. That which leads to unity is good. That which takes you away from unity is evil. And you can find, in the Christian scripture, you can find endless lists of what's good and what's evil. And if you look at them closely, you'll find this to be true. M was still living in a separate house with his wife on account of a misunderstanding with the other members of his family. So that's what Jain Thakur was just saying. Ramakrishna was just saying, that if you're living according to the body and mind, and you really are devoted to the idea of yourself as a body and mind, you're going to have all kinds of preferences, and you're not going to be able to live with these people or those people, or be with these people or those people, right? Master to Banerjee, and pointing to M, he also lives in a separate house. You two will get along just fine. Once two men happened to meet. One said to the other, "Who are you?" "Oh, I am away from my own country," was the other's reply. The second man then asked the first, "And who are you, pray?" "Oh, I am away from my beloved," was the answer. Both were in the same plight, so they got along very well. But one need not have any fear if one takes refuge in God. God protects his devotee, right? Where do we find God? In the drawing room. If we take refuge in the unchanging aspect of ourself, that which in us doesn't change, we have to find that first. That's why we practice. Once you find it, it's a place within that you can sit and watch the world in a way that you're not torn and pulled into it, right? He says, you don't have to have any fear if you take refuge in God. If you go to this place first, when things are troubling, when things are, instead of getting involved, and fighting and getting all worked up over something, step back, see the whole picture. Don't identify yourself with one side or the other. Good practice for these days, especially. Take refuge in God. God protects his devotee. All right, it's 8 o'clock. We'll stop there.